which could lead to obesity, heart disease, and diabetes as they age. We must protect them from drinks high in sugar. Demand a stricter health promotion levy now. Sign the petition on healer.org.
Households earning between 8,000 Rand and 22,000 Rand per month have expanded significantly in South Africa. This is according to a study published by the University of Cape Town's Liberty Institute titled An Investigation into South Africa's Mass Market. Now, in 2014, the Institute conducted its first majority report study, and a decade later, the 2024 edition captured significant changes. The study also found that between 2012 and 2022, South Africa's working class grew by an eye-opening 6 million people. Now, while the number of working class households increased by 1.3 million over the same period. For more now, we're joined by the University of Cape Town's Liberty Institute's Professor James Lappeman, who joins us virtually from Cape Town. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. By way of laying a foundation for this conversation, explain to us who is considered working class and who is considered being in a middle-income household in South Africa today, and how that is deduced.
That's a good question. And look, I will say up front that, these definitions of middle class and working class are quite contested, and it'll depend a little bit on who you speak to. But in terms of how we've framed it over the last few years at the Institute, is really at 22,000 Rand per month household income. That's essentially where most direct government support stops. And so we've said the middle class then is 22,000 Rand and above. And you've got this group between 8 and 22,000, where 8,000 is the cutoff for most of the grant income received in households, and 22,000 is where the gap housing subsidy was. So we've got this working class in the middle that really is often ignored in the literature. It's often ignored in discourse around South African consumers.
And are there lines often blurred in between those bands?
100%. Anyone who kind of gives you an exact figure to the exact person is definitely, playing a dangerous game. In South Africa, households are moving up from lower income bands into higher income bands all the time. A better job, a salary increase, partnering up. There's many ways that households increase their income, and in the same way in South Africa is quite fascinating that there are also households moving down income bands, and that's something we've definitely recognized over the last 10 years.
And of course, taking into consideration the history of South Africa, there are those who have moved into the middle class. We've spoken a lot about the growing black middle class in South Africa, but we also know that there are different bands within the middle class as well, if you take into consideration the assets of people and the debt of people.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I really encourage people to think about when you think about inequality in South Africa, it's so easy to think about, there's rich people on the one side and they're living in big houses and they've got big properties and they drive luxury cars. And then on the other hand, you're looking at, poor households that are living off grants and have very restricted lives. But, you've got this working class group that's 21% of the population. And so, often again in the discourse, we talk about the middle class, we talk about the poor and the working poor. But here's a group that, that is significant.
Now, your analysis of the General Household Survey data found that the working class's spending power nearly doubled from 280 billion Rand a year, is the figure I'm reading here, to 550 billion in 2022. What do you put that down to?
I mean, there's a number of reasons. Certainly, there has been wage inflation. So if you look at kind of minimum wage inflation, over a period of 10 years, incremental inflation will have an effect. And you'll see households moving into different brackets. But also there's population growth. If you think a nice number to think about is, on average, South Africa is adding 1,000 households to the number of households every day. And so if you've got this, 1,000 households being added every day to our population, yes, many are in low income, many will be low income households, but also many will be in the working class, or there'll be middle class households whose children kind of are entering the workforce and maybe starting out in a working class position. So, I think when you think of population growth, it also helps to kind of contextualize some of these things.
But that number is quite astounding, especially if you take into consideration our very high unemployment numbers. How do you figure that out?
South Africa is a country of anomalies. It really is. And I think it's also important to understand for us, when we look at household income, we're not talking about per capita. And so, a big issue in South Africa is you'll have households with limited breadwinners. So if you've got someone who's unemployed, but they're living in a household where there is a breadwinner who is maybe in the working class or the middle class, they still live in a household earning a certain amount. And so, yes, these households are very often under pressure. Absolutely. But, when you look at our unemployment, you realize that someone is absorbing that. And one of the big narratives in South Africa has been termed black tax. And I think that's where you see the middle class, you see the working class absorbing a lot of that pressure for the country.
I once put it to Edward Kisweta from SARS is that we really need to look at tax incentive for those of us who are indeed paying black tax. I'm still waiting for an answer on that. So, Prof, even though the working class has grown exponentially, you believe it's not being given the attention it deserves. Explain to me what you mean by that.
Well, I think, we spend a lot of time at the Institute with businesses and marketers talking about market sizing, talking about, target markets and all that kind of business stuff. But if you think in the period of 10 years, the spending power in the working class going from approximately 280 to 550 billion. I mean, that is a massive growth in a period of 10 years. 6 million more individuals. And often in these conversations, I think, businesses aren't always adjusting their market sizes to the realities of the changes in South Africa. And, I think in the conversations that we have, we often get requests around, for example, the majority report, what's happening in the mass market. It's 80% of the country, and yes, the middle class and the high net worth, but you've got this middle class, this working class group, that is 21% of the population. And when I look around for reports, when I look around for trend decks, when I look around for information on the working class, you hardly see anything.
Now, government and business, we hear banging the drum in desperate need for economic growth. We hear day in and day out. Do you think that they're paying enough attention to the wants and needs of those growing economic groupings we've been speaking about, who could help them actually get there?
Yeah, look, I think it's an important group. If you think of this working class as just pre-middle class, once you move into the middle class, there's still a lot of pressure. But you move into a situation where, especially those who are employed in the private sector, are now contributing from a tax perspective, often from an entrepreneurship, building businesses perspective. And so this idea of, being able to provide the necessary training, the necessary education for this group to be able to move into higher skilled jobs is an absolute necessity. And if you think of that working class, very often those kinds of jobs are jobs that are outsourced to either overseas suppliers, to automation. And so it is a vulnerable group. Some of our economists will use the term missing middle. We've used the term, in years gone by, skilled strugglers. These are employed, often, if not most of the time, formally employed individuals in households, but the skills deficit is felt there a lot more so than in the middle class, where there tends to be more skills and filling more kind of scarce skills type jobs, which has with it wage inflation way above what the working class experiences.
What fascinating insights. Thank you so much for coming on to share them with us. Cape Town Liberty Institute's Professor James Lappeman from UCT, a study published titled An Investigation into South Africa's Mass Market. We thank him so much for his time.